Hello, everybody.
Hello.
And welcome to a climactic, apocalyptic episode of Two Gays, One Episode.
It's the end.
My name's Alex.
And I am GoatJesus.
Who are you? Who is this strange person on the other end of the line?
I am myself. I'm me. I'm worth living here. So
Good.
we're going to be talking about
Woo!
End of Evangelion, and we're going to be needing to do this in probably multiple parts. EOE is really dense. We have a lot to say about it. It's going to be either 2 or 3 parts. Is that right?
Yes, it's going to be at least 2, probably 3.
Okay.
Maybe 4. Probably not 4. But our plan for today is to cover the general outline of everything up to the credit sequence in End of Evangelion.
Yeah, if we can.
And then we'll probably do a part on the rest of it. And then we'll probably do a part on... Oh, you're right, actually. This might be too much. And then we probably want to do like a deep dive into everything. The meaning of it. The symbolism of it. How we feel about it. How does this scene of a naked 14-year-old make you feel, Michael?
It makes me feel skeeved out. Ew.
It makes me feel skeeved out, too.
So... first of all, we kind of, I have your notes here open. I have Alex's notes here, which I've contributed to just a little bit. So I'm gonna go off of, cause I've seen this movie probably an unspeakable amount of times, like 40 times or something like that. It's really, it's insane how many times I've watched EOE. When I first saw it as a kid, I used to watch it like on replay. Like there was one time where I saw it 3 times in a single day. This was like early on because it was so fascinating of a film and it was very beautiful. And at the time when I was like 14, it was hard to kind of wrap my head around. So yeah. I would rewatch it a lot. And this was before like there was an agreed upon translation for everything. So which makes it even more confusing. I mean, I don't even think there is still an agreed upon translation for this movie.
There are maybe some errors in the subtitles.
Yeah.
Like just grammar errors,
like
which are kind of weird.
We'll talk about it
as we get to it. Yeah. I remember, because I watched this with Michael for the first time, I remember being really overwhelmed by it. Then I watched it again, and I was still really overwhelmed by it. Then I watched it a third time, and I was still really overwhelmed by it. But now I watch it, and I like really enjoy it.
Yeah, so. it's very enjoyable. I remember showing you all of Ava within like 2 nights or something. It was insane. We marathoned.
I think we watched the movie on its own. I think we watched the movie on a third day maybe, or
yeah,
maybe,
it was on its own. It was like 2 days for the series and then 1 day for the movie originally. This was back in the Skype era, like in 2013 or something. It was like a long time ago.
2011, I think, even longer ago.
Yeah. So at the beginning of the movie, there's 13 logos. At the start of the movie, there's like so many logos.
I don't know if it's 13. It might be more.
I know Sega's one of them.
Sega,
yeah.
Production IG, TV
Star
Tokyo,
Child,
Star
Toho.
Child, Gynex, obviously, Toho.
There's
a lot.
There's a lot. I think Kadokawa is one of them as well. There was so much funding that this movie had, and it was split between several different production companies. Where not several, but like Production IG mainly and Studio Gynex were doing a collaboration on this movie, and it had all the money in the world to make it as beautiful as it needed to be. This is in stark contrast to End of TV, which we haven't covered yet. We plan to cover that after the film. Yep. So like End of the TV series, episode 25 and 26 are famously like low budget and sort of hacked together. There's a lot of references to the events that happen in this film. This is a much more literal, a much more budgeted, and a much more like grounded take on a lot of the same events. So,
yeah.
You want to talk about the opening scene of the film, Alex?
Yeah, so the opening scene is Shinji is depressed. He's still depressed. He's probably more depressed than he was at the end of episode 24 of Evangelion. He's completely non-communicative. He's sitting by where he met Kaoru, I think.
Yes.
And then a transformer box falls from a this is really clever, actually. It falls from
a telephone line, I think.
Telephone pole.
Yeah.
Falls from the telephone pole and lands in the water, which is a shot-for-shot recreation of Kaoru's head falling in water.
Yeah.
So that's a really effective way to show what he's thinking about without literally having like some anime flashback where it's like, the song is good. Like, you know what I mean? You know what I mean? It's not too much. It's just enough, and it really gives you this sinking under your skin feeling that like, he's really struggling.
What's really interesting to me about the opening is that, you know, in Eva, summer represents this purgatory, because the summer is like eternal, and the heat is what destroyed the world, and it's sort of a metaphor for like how characters cannot progress, that they're kind of repeating things, like Shinji going on the train over and over again. It's that cyclical kind of like, my flaws are coming back, and I am not really capable of moving on. And we open with just this immense heat wave. Like Shinji is like in this, it's very, very exposed. It's very white. The composition is also split straight across the middle after this like really, really long tilt upwards. And that tilt upwards, it makes the shot feel really isolating. It makes it feel very distant. It's very like harsh, very hot, and he is like dripping with either sweat or water. There's theories that Shinji tried to drown himself. Hideaki Anno famously said that Shinji is the type of character who wants to commit suicide, but is such a huge failure that he can't even do that. So I think that's
so dark.
It's really dark, but that is.
I hope you got the help you needed.
He based it off of himself because he was ready to jump from a rooftop, and he couldn't do it because he was just so afraid of dying that it stopped him from doing that. And that's kind of like the headspace that Shinji's in at the beginning of the movie.
Ikuhara was on the next rooftop humming Ode to Joy.
Yeah, and what's really interesting, you know, there is debate. Is he sweating here? Is he dripping water because he tried to drown himself? I subscribe to the drowning. I know that somebody sent me like storyboards from it. It was like, in Japanese this translates to sweat, and I'm like, actually no, that just translates to water drops. So I think it's pretty it's pretty ambiguous what you kind of make of this, but it's very meaningful.
I think in context it makes more sense as sweat, but I think it's a perfectly valid reading to be like, yeah, he tried to commit suicide there.
Yeah.
All art is subjective except when it isn't.
Death of the author for the most part.
Yeah. Well, it's I just want to say something quickly about artistic interpretation. Just very quickly. Art is not necessarily always subjective, but all art can be subjective. It depends on how well you can argue what your stance is. If your take is Shinji is an alien from Mars who's lying the whole time, where in the text why do you think that? What's from the text that makes you think that? If you think Shinji drowned himself, you can say, well, he's dripping water, he's very depressed, it's a powerful moment.
And then
that's all valid.
You can bring in the author too and like talk about that as support as well. So it's interesting, but you can or you don't have to.
And the author is only so much of an authority on his own work because you have your own relationship with the text they've created.
Yeah, and also they lie a lot. A lot of directors love to BS.
Or they forget.
But some of them do lie. Like the Coen brothers, whenever someone asks them what the meaning of their movie is, they're just like, it doesn't mean anything. That's such BS. You know it's BS. So it's like they can say whatever they want, and I mean they even lied about like Fargo being based on a true story and stuff like that. So it's kind of author is not really a supreme authority on a work, but I think in the case of Eva, it is very related to the author in a lot of ways. So it's much easier to bring him in. I don't think it's a good thing to do in like the story still has to work. You can't use the author to justify the quality of it, but for interpretation, I think in this case it's a little, it's okay to bring him in. A little bit.
I'm laughing because I'm thinking of J.K. Rowling and all her revisions, her Twitter revisions on her story.
Yeah. So author is dead, maybe, perhaps, sometimes. That's kind of yes. that's the
author is dying. He's on his deathbed. He's telling you things, but you're not sure if you trust.
Yeah,
him.
he's like rambling.
Drugs.
Yeah,
he's rambling at you, and you're like, really?
And really, the opening
Shinji on a farm. Anyway, go
The
on.
opening sequence is also really interesting because I think it ties very well into the ending. Like the first shot and the last shot really mirror each other, except like instead of Shinji being alone, kind of suffering by himself, he's with someone else at the end. I guess we'll talk about it more, but it's that it's that straight
with someone.
It's that straight split down the middle, that horizontal long shot where it's like slashed right across the middle, and it's just really easy to connect the first and last shots, which is really good filmmaking, by the way. If you're interested in filmmaking, first and last shots of something are super important, and they should be meaningful. It should be like a thesis statement if you can. I heard from one of my professors actually that the first 3 shots of a film need to be like a preview into the core argument that you're going to make thematically. And since Eva is about loneliness and about the self and about relationships to others, it's kind of already previewing those larger themes and the larger argument. It's very clever. It's intelligent, as opposed to something like 3.0 plus 1.0, which has absolutely no meaning in its opening shots, and it's just the Eiffel Tower. Wow. So
Wow. We're already starting. Already. Hate mail. I can hear the keys clacking away.
Well, you see, the Eiffel Tower is a reference to Nadia, Secret of Blue Water, which has to do with blah, 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 blah. Meta. Anyway, no.
It's also a symbol of progress.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Because that's what the movie's about.
I don't actually know. I've been trying to think about this. It's a recent structure. It's artistic. I don't know. Anyway,
moving on.
Then we have a charming, quiet scene of Shinji in the hospital. Very meaningful, very personal.
It's
very emotional.
It sent my emotions right into my hand. No, I'm just kidding.
Wow. Wow. Oh. Okay, so what is this scene? What is the point of this scene? It's disgusting. What is the point of it?
I think the point in part is to justify Shinji's non-action, and really like bring him even lower than, like, we want to bring him to a lower point than he was even at the end of episode 24. And Shinji is catatonic. He is incapable of action, and I think if you just had Kaoru's death given the ending of episode 24 to go off of, it wouldn't justify his absolute refusal to do anything. And I think that it has to be gross and personal and a huge mistake. Like, he has to make an additional error to justify his want being inaction, where he thinks that him doing anything is just more harm than good. And this solidifies it. It helps justify it, and it helps make the character's inability to do anything believable. The actual, like, why is something that is debated, where it's like...
Well, I think it also hits you in the face. I think it's the main thing it does, is it hits you in the face and tells you this movie is going to be absolutely gross. You should be prepared to be scarred by the end of this thing. We are going to open on this. Your heroic character defiles a woman.
it's not quite a sexual assault.
Girl, really.
But it is like the closest thing to a sexual assault that they could have done. And it
is a defiling, I think, is what the word
I think if he had gone full sexual assault, it would have been too much. It actually probably would have been laughable, like, in terms of it being edgy or bad. This is like disgusting while also being so specific that it hits you harder than if it was a sexual assault or something like that. It's kind of like,
I mean, I think it technically is still sexual assault. It's just exposure, and she's not conscious, so it's even worse.
I mean, I think I'm just using sexual assault in
he's
place.
Not touching her. He's not touching.
Yeah, in place of like a physical interaction. Let's just say
the places this show takes us to. Is a boy alone in hospital? Is this really sexual assault? Well, we have to consider many factors before we Like, oh my god.
I think it is an assault of some kind, but it's not like the traditional sexual assault that you would think of, essentially.
It makes you hate Shinji, I think. Or really pity him at the very least.
It makes you feel things. I remember I made the horrible mistake of showing my mother Evangelion. Do not get into it. It's like a whole thing. But when she saw this scene, she went, Shinji wouldn't do that. Why would Shinji do that? It was like she had to like sort of do a double take and reevaluated his entire character based off of this moment. And I do
is it in character actually? That's a good question.
I think he is the main character because he's the one with the most where the most choice and decision revolves around. Like he has the most opportunity for agency out of any character, I think, in the film. So it's like, and he chooses not to, which is the point. But he's presented with decisions constantly where it's like Misato's like, you go do this, and then he's like, no. And then he's in the Ava unit, and then it's just like, oh, now what are you gonna do? And he's like, I'm gonna just scream. or it's like he's given instrumentality. It's like you have the choice of humanity. He's like, I'm gonna do the worst choice ever. It's like that sort of. It's a series of bad decisions.
He makes bad choices.
Yeah.
He makes impulsive bad choices. Okay.
Yeah.
I can buy into that because I think he's a little too smart and a little too sensitive to do something like this. But like, that's my only thought.
I mean, I've always kind of explained it as Shinji's a very subservient character who wants to be told what to do. He's even demanding Asuka tell him what to do in the scene. He's like, call me stupid, call me an idiot, tell me what to do. I don't know what to do. And it's basically a plea for like...
He just wants any kind of attention.
I don't know what I should be doing with myself. Please tell me something. Like, say something.
Yeah.
And then he listens to
he also feels really disconnected and he wants any sort of connection, and even a negative one of like even like
yes,
her kicking him in the face. He just wants to feel
he has no friends. He has no human connection at this point. Like
if
his entire
only Kensuke was still there, he would be fine.
I mean, probably. That's the funny part. It's just it's supreme loneliness.
Hey, Shinji.
It's
oh my god, Kensuke, thank god.
It's
wow, no one's been happy to see me before.
It's supreme loneliness and desperation for human connection, and I think that's why he does it. It's just I'm listening to my instincts, I'm being subservient, I'm also like I'm having some kind of connection with Asuka right now, even if it's like the most effed up and horrible and worst way of doing it. And he does it to feel something that isn't just suffering and heartache and loneliness. I think that's really the reason. And she's unconscious, he's locked in the room, he has no consequences that he can discern at this moment, and so it's very easy. But he was almost thinking with a warped perspective on it, because afterwards there's that clarity that he has where it's just like, what did I just do?
Yeah, he feels so ashamed about it. He feels so ashamed about it for the whole movie. Really.
Yeah,
so it is. Yeah, it is almost the inciting incident a little bit, because his shame and his.
I would say it absolutely is the inciting incident. Yeah, it's the Shinji's everyday reality is, which is the everyday starts with Shinji suffering, he's lonely, and then the inciting incident is he made this horrible decision, this horrible mistake, and this is the event that is going to plague him. We're presenting the problem, the psychological problem, and this is it. The movie would not be as good without it. I'm 100% sure that it needs to be here. That you can't take it out. There has to be a beat like it, at least.
It could have been. I think it could have been a little more tastefully done, but I agree.
Yeah, I'm just saying the beat has to happen. It's not. Yeah. It doesn't have to be this exact thing. But contrast it to something like the manga, which removes it entirely. Oh, wow. Because the manga adapts End of Eva, and Shinji does not do that. What happens is Asuka wakes up randomly. He's not able to even unzip his trousers at this point. He just walks in the room. He stares at her for a second. He goes, "Wow, you're like kind of mean." And then she like wakes up and she's like, "Ah!" And she screams at the top of her lungs, pounces onto him, and starts strangling him. And then the nerve crew come in, pull her off, and then he goes, "That was weird," and then moves on. And he's not in a good headspace to justify that movie's events from that point on, so the manga has to make it so that Shinji does help Asuka and he comes to save the day in Eva Unit 1 against the Eva series and yada yada yada. It's just it's a version of it where Shinji makes the right choices and it still forces him in that choice where it's like I have to choose between instrumentality and ending the world or stopping it, and it's so much more obvious of a decision because his headspace isn't as low in the manga. It's a perfect contrast. It's like a parallel dimension of what this movie could have been, and the him making the right decision at the end for the first time is far less effective, in my opinion. It's far more effective here than it is in the manga, where he's just made all the right choices, and then it's like not surprising that he makes the right choice at the end anyway too. So here there's growth and there's more of an arc and that experience that shapes him. Like instrumentality kind of in the film shapes him to do the right decision at the end. So that's important, I think.
Yes. Then we have, after this, so we'll talk a bit about the animation a bit later. Then we kind of set up all our major players. We're going to set up all the sort of main storylines. So Shinji Asuka is one of them. And then... also, this scene establishes Asuka, actually. It shows that Asuka's comatose and that she's not in a good way either.
Yeah, she's unwilling to move. Scene. And it's even revealed later in the film that she was aware of what was happening and everything like that. She's just unwilling to do anything because of her mental state.
She's also probably dehydrated and struggling. But,
Isn't that what the IV is for?
but I mean, she was dehydrated, so she's probably still recovering.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. You're right. Yeah, from where episode 24 left off with her. Yeah.
24. Yeah, because she got those dry lips. Then we see the Bridge Bunnies of all characters because they have a beat in this movie.
Yeah, you want to talk about the Bridge Bunnies? Like, what do you think their inclusion was?
Well, I think I think you mentioned this. They're like the average Joe, right? Like they're just like the normal people who are kind of in the middle of it. They're for the purposes of exposition because they have to say that like the psych barrier is passing past the point of meridian or whatever the hell. But it's like so they serve that purpose, but they also serve the purpose of these are normal people and now they're in the worst situation they've ever been in. And they're drinking coffee. And then we set up Masato next, I think. Masato's just in her car, and she's sad, and she's alone. And then we have, I think, Rei after that. Rei's in her room. She smashes the glasses, which will tell you immediately this is not a standalone movie. You cannot watch the End of Evangelion without having seen Evangelion, because a lot of stuff won't make sense.
You could try to. I mean, believe it or not, I know people who have, and
I think you'll enjoy it, but I think... Sorry,
they enjoy it more for the visual experience, if anything, and the tone, I guess, because it still works as an emotional piece, but it's not really like plot, like character.
You don't get these payoffs.
The movie. You said this really, but it is just a bunch of payoffs essentially. The movie is a series of badass payoffs essentially. Yeah.
It's literally like, and it's like almost every episode. It's a payoff to almost like half of them, I think, more or less.
Yeah.
So the Rei thing, that's from Rei 1 and Rei 2, those episodes. The Masato thing's a payoff to like 24 and like all this stuff.
So what do you think the glasses represent? Like her breaking them and
obviously Gendo. They represent Gendo.
Yeah.
Not much more.
She's like, I'm done with Gendo. F him. I'm going to like. She eventually decides to shift instrumentality and give it to Shinji, which I think is interesting. Like, why do you think she makes that decision?
Well, that's a bigger question, I think. But I think it has a lot to do with her being Rei 3, and it's almost like she's fulfilling Rei 2's last wish.
Right.
Really.
Yeah.
I think
there's like some kind of continuity happening at this point. like we saw in episode
Yeah.
23 that she was crying for no reason, and it was because she was feeling the echoes of Ray 2 essentially. So Ray 3 is able to almost feel, or is the same person at this point. Like the soul has hopped, but she has become like so there's this thing we talked about in our episode 23 podcast with the doll culture of Japan, and how they can develop souls through experience. And Ritsuko says Rei doesn't have a soul, but part of Eva is arguing, I think, that personhood is derived from experience. And that's partly like a bigger argument that Eva makes, because like Kaji says, pain is a necessary part of the human condition. Is that like suffering is an inevitability. It educates us and helps us to empathize and feel for people who are also going through it. It is a terrible thing, but it also is just a part of life, and that's a very Japanese and Zen kind of belief, like a Zen Buddhist belief, that joy and suffering are requirements. Yeah, go on.
It's also reincarnation.
Yes.
She's a reincarnation of Ray too, so there's almost some reincarnation elements here.
Yeah, there's,
which is, I believe, very Buddhist.
Yeah. I mean, I think Eva is interesting because, and this might come from the fact that it's different writers also working on it, and it's not just Hideaki Anno, but there are some very, very overt criticisms of Zen Buddhism in Eva and collectivism as a whole, because one of the negative elements of Zen Buddhism is that it encourages collectivism. I guess we'll talk about this later, but there are Zen elements in Eva where it's like, yes, it's very much in agreement with those principles, and then other Zen elements that it's like, no, like this is it's effed up to not view people as individuals who are struggling in part 2. And so it's really interesting how it tackles those things. But Rei herself, you're right about the reincarnation. I think that's on point. I think there's that whole like personhood is developed by experience, and Rei 3 has sort of the soul. In Eva lore, there's this thing called the Door of Guff, and it's where all souls come from. And there were no souls that Rei doesn't have a soul, but she's kind of developed one, and I think it bounced off of the Door of Guff, if we're thinking about it literally, like the sort of soul afterlife, and went
I think they're pulling it back to
Rei 3.
Rei.
Yeah.
Because they can pull souls from the Door of Guff, I guess. I don't know.
Maybe Ritsuko did it.
Want to cover in part 3.
That's another possibility.
Maybe Ritsuko did.
Like maybe Ritsuko is responsible for the continuity of Rei 2 and 3 as like as a way to get back at Gendo, maybe.
Oh, as revenge.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, she was the one who said take the body or whatever when they found the dead Rei. So
yeah, I mean, it could have been part of her. It could have been part of Ritsuko's, like maybe like a potential ace in the hole. I mean, that's maybe a stretch, but it's not a plot point that's explored. It's not anything. It's just Ritsuko's responsible for Rei 3 sort of being made, and then she magically has like Rei 2 in her a bit. So it's kind of
I think that's
there's some connection
valid.
there.
we're kind of out of order actually, because before Rei, there's the scene with Gendo talking to Seele, which this is kind of the point of attack almost, where is that right? I don't remember what a point of attack is actually.
So a point of attack is usually the thing that drives you into the second act of something. So it's like the declaration that they're going to send the JSSDF or whatever they're called. Once they start to come, that is the point of attack, because that's sort of the thing
so
that
this is a warning of the point of attack.
Yeah.
Okay, so this scene actually is probably the first time I actually enjoy Seele, because their dialogue, they're so pointless in the show. They're just there and just like constantly talking, and you're like, what are you talking about? What does any of this mean? Why is any of this pertinent? And this is the first time they're pertinent, because they're threatening Gendo, because they're literally going to come get him. They're coming after him. Literally, that's the plot of the movie. And they say some stuff about like, this is the next advancement of humanity. I understand what the next advancement of humanity is. That's a totally understandable concept. I'm not confused by that. So I finally kind of get Seele, and then they threaten him. They're like, death will be our rebirth or something. And Gendo is like, death solves nothing. And they're like, well, you're gonna die soon anyway. And that's the scene basically. There is one thing. Sorry, what were you gonna say?
Oh, I was just gonna say real quick that it seems like instrumentality, which is sort of the wish that someone gets once. They sort of exposit the principles here a little bit. Where
it's to guide the pathway of humanity, is what it is.
Yeah, but it's a Lilith entity plus an Adam entity plus anti-AT field merging together, so they can merge together, creates the situation where there's an impact that can occur. And it's been prophesized by these things called the Dead Sea Scrolls, which they found, and it says instrumentality will happen once all the angels are defeated, and it's just gonna happen. And it's gonna be humanity will merge together. And the idea is that Gendo is going to make his version of it, which probably isn't going to look identical to what Seele and what Shinji end up wishing for later, because Shinji is in just the perfect headspace to coincidentally wish exactly for what the prophecy foretold, which is what Seele wants.
Yeah.
But it seems like Seele is going to exclude Gendo from instrumentality. That's what they want. And they want to evolve into the next sort of reality.
This is all stuff I want to cover in part 3.
Yeah.
I think. I want to get into the nitty-gritty religious meaning stuff. I think the most important thing, the practical thing is they want to decide the fate of humanity. Should humanity all be separate and in pain, or should it all be together and happy?
Yeah.
That's what this scene is about, so that sets up the core conflict of what the movie's going to be
about.
Because Gendo wants one thing and Seele wants supremacy.
As far as exposition goes in Eva, this is one of the more pertinent / well done exposition sequences. It's very like pinpointed. It's like, okay, no nonsense. Here's what we want, and here's how we're gonna get it, and these are the mechanics. And it kind of almost brushes over it a little too quickly, so that people can kind of be like baffled. But if you rewatch the movie enough, then you're like, oh, actually, that is some solid exposition, and I sort of understand. I understand what's going on.
That was my reaction when I watched it the other day, at least.
No. I mean, I thought that too. I'm like, oh, actually, I point to this scene a lot to explain the mechanics. I'm like, yeah, it's over here. Exposition's important. A lot of people who criticize anime, by the way, I just want to say this, they hate exposition, and you guys are dumb. I'm not I don't actually mean that, but exposition is a necessary and even good thing as long as it's not overused. The problem with a lot of anime is that it tends to exposit things that are unnecessary to exposit, or do it in a way that is very clunky and not well integrated.
Well, it's like what I mentioned at the beginning, when they have the transformer falling, immediately your mind goes to the reminding of that. It doesn't have a whole flashback.
They rely on cheap techniques like flashbacks a lot. Like, I've been watching this anime called Vinland Saga, and they literally had a flashback to something that happened in that episode just to remind you that it happened.
That's a lot.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
It's a technique, I guess. Because it happens often. It'll be like 5 minutes later, it'll be like, and the flashback that happened 5 minutes ago, and I'm like, I remember that. I watched that 5 minutes ago. My memory is bad, but it's not that bad.
Yeah, that's sort of in your face and poorly integrated exposition. This is not my evaluation on Vinland Saga for any Vinland Saga fans out there. I'm just saying that was an example of maybe some poorly done exposition.
It happens in so many anime. If you criticize that, you have to criticize most anime. Not this one though.
Ava is pretty good about exposition. It either doesn't do it, or when it does, it's pretty fast and pretty justified.
Quick and painless.
Fairly justified. I mean, not always. Like, part of the art of exposition is like. Are you expositing it to someone who doesn't know? Like, there's the fish out of water technique, where you tell a character because they don't know something, so you tell that character something. There's also the exposition of conflict, where you're like, oh, I'm mad at you, and I want to remind you about this thing because it'll hurt you to remind you about it. And there's also like exposition of comedy. That was one that my teacher told me about, where it's like you exposit something because a character is really dumb, and it's funny if they do that. Like, it's for comedy things.
What? I've never even heard of that.
Yeah. There's several different techniques to integrate exposition in a way that doesn't bother people, because the idea is that you just don't want a character talking at the audience more than the other characters. They should be talking in a way that's like coherent. Like, it's justified for me to say this thing to you right now that you need to know. But it's good to have it, because it's better to tell your audience something that they need to know than to have them be confused for no reason. Yeah. So exposition is not evil. It's just a tool, and you can misuse the tool, but it can be good. And in this instance, I think it's pretty well done.
It does come down to how people misunderstand show don't tell too. Like they're like show don't tell. It doesn't mean characters do things and don't speak. It just means when characters are talking, they should be speaking with a purpose that demonstrates something.
Yeah. That's what it is. It's like, there's nothing wrong with, for example, okay, in Star Wars episode, I think it's like episode 2, there's this scene where Anakin and Obi-Wan are in this elevator, and Anakin's like, do you remember that adventure that we had? And Obi-Wan's like, yes, I remember that adventure. That was a really great adventure. We didn't get to see that because it didn't make a scene out of it. But if it had been like Anakin talking to Obi-Wan and he was like, Master,
and they started an argument. They have an argument. That would be showing.
Yeah. If they had an argument. If they were like, that one time you really effed me up or whatever, and then Obi-Wan's like, no, I didn't, and then you would be showing them fighting, and it would be a scene based in dialogue, but it still shows that they're like at each other's throats or something. I mean, that's not the goal. It should be to show that they're friends, but that's just an example, right? It's like there are romance movies all over the place where it's just dialogue. It's just characters talking to each other, like the Before trilogy or Her, or any of those types of things. And it's you know, like the novice writer YouTuber would just be like, this is all tell, don't show, but it's actually
Rag the YouTubers.
It's just kind of frustrating that there's like a misinformation of this, because a lot of people who watch things, they love those things. They don't see it as tell, don't show, or like gratuitous or something, because those are showing instead of telling. They're using dialogue to show, and that's how you can do that. You can be like, in a romance film, you ask a character about themselves, like the male asks the female about themselves, right? But their goal is to get to know them. It's to maybe be like, do we have things in common? I'm going to pry. I'm going to like investigate. There's all these actions that they're doing. It's all character action because they're using dialogue to get to the heart of their goal. And it's all show. I'm very passionate about this.
It's true. Well, it's also, how do you save budget? How do you save money by like you have two characters talking, and how do you make that interesting? And that's where poetry comes in too. It's because poetry is how you write dialogue or phrasing or prose in a beautiful way. How do you make it interesting to listen to beyond just the nitty gritty of it?
Yeah.
That's where it's really important.
I used to be one of those people, by the way, that thought that dialogue equaled told. But yeah.
Yeah. It's not really accurate to say it that way, I don't think.
It's not.
But anyway, so Sealay they have access to the Japanese government. There's something about this that I noticed, but I'll get to that in a second. Where they're going to use their first tool at their disposal, which is the Magi. They have like 7 different Magi systems in Germany and America, and they're going to use all of them to attack the Japanese Magi, which are at Nerve, to take it over and then control. And then they even have a line of dialogue like, oh, to control the Magi is to control Nerve. And it's like, okay, so there are the stakes, right? You immediately understand what the stakes are. I think Hyuga says it. And so yeah, that happens. And then they have to call Ritsuko out of retirement, out of prison, out of her empty room with the Nerve logo in the background. And she has to come and she's like, oh, didn't I already do this? And it's episode 14 all over again. And we have literally the exact same shot reanimated of the blue taking over the red. Because that's how computers work. You're like, oh no, they're hacking. And then you see a visual display of it, even though no computer would ever work this way.
Yeah, I remember YouTubers in the late 2000s / early 2010s complained about the reuse, quote unquote reuse of animation there.
Okay.
It's not really.
It's fine. Even if it was, it would be fine.
Wow, I'm just like coming in, steering my car, and
Drag
I'm like,
the
yeah,
YouTubers.
I'm like hitting the YouTube, like, but not anybody specific, just vague YouTubers.
Strike back at them. Vague tweet them.
Vague tweet them, yeah. I do think I don't think it is lazy to have visual callbacks.
We don't hate you. We just think you're wrong.
No, of course we don't hate I don't hate anybody.
I'm just joking. I'm kidding.
Yeah. But the what I'm saying is like Hideaki Anno's style in general, like part of his directing style is visual callbacks and repetition of certain shots. And he does this in Love and Pop, he does this in Shikijutsu, he does this in his live action films as well. It is just a stylistic choice to have a shot that mimics something earlier. I think it's been reanimated. I think it's been at least recompiled. I don't think that it is a lazy thing to use.
They got the light box out and they traced it.
Probably. I mean, yeah.
Probably, yeah.
Or they reshot it on 35 millimeter with some of the same cells, but either way, it's like one or two instances of reused shots in a movie that is immaculate.
It's like 5 seconds of the movie.
It's like really beautiful, and there is no cutting corners for the most part. I mean, there were production problems. We can talk about that later, but not to the degree that. I mean, this is one of the most like.
I'd love it if they reused those like
fulfilled
those bridge scenes of like, oh no, Misato's holding the chair and Yoba's reacting to something, and like they don't do those.
Yeah, they don't anything character based.
They don't reuse those shots. They reuse like 20 times in the series, like not even like a couple of times. They reuse those so many times.
Yeah, this is a immaculate. It's one of the best looking animated films ever. I want to say, like I've ever seen, and I've seen a lot of animation.
Yeah. I'm sure most of our viewers have.
I've even seen.
See, I'm including the viewers now in the podcast.
The Boy in the White Mare, I think is what it's called. That was a pretty animation. But I've seen some obscure things, and this is still really beautiful. Like,
yeah.
I mean,
you can tell Production IG was involved because Production IG is like I think they're known for like being super immaculate.
Yeah, they did Ghost in the Shell and stuff like that, like the original Ghost in the Shell, the movie.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Or was that Madhouse? No, I think it was Production IG. They did Ghost in the Shell standalone complex, at least. I know that 100%. But and that show looks good too.
Yeah. It's good TV animation, and I don't think they reuse shots of Shigeru Yoba in that. Just like cut his hair differently and make him look like the character from Ghost in the Shell. Yeah, so the JS, and then because the Magi attack fails, Ritsuko repels them. We have a brief mention here of "Isn't that right, Mother?" which sets up something that happens later, but it's all just a callback to her relationship with her mother, which is kind of the core issue of Ritsuko is her relationship.
Yeah, the supercomputer has an AI that replicates aspects of her mother, so she kind of like identifies with it as being her mother in part.
Basically,
so, yeah,
basically. And then we have this brutal scene of these soldiers invading these like rent-a-cops basically at Nerve. Like the JSSDF are like actual soldiers, and they are just slaughtering the I don't know why I'm laughing, but they're slaughtering the Nerve personnel. They stab one in the back, they just brutalize them, then an explosion goes off, you see all their like weird helicopter things flying down. It's just like constant energy action. It's very overwhelming. After this really sort of sleepy slow intro, you have this like explosion of action, which is great. Very cool way to do the pacing.
I think it's also really like a purposeful irony that like humanity is gonna kill or be the cause of humanity. It's not the angels. Yeah, right. So
it's humans on humans.
Yeah.
It's the brutality of man.
Being Eva is part of the kaiju genre, and it's sort of undercutting it in a really clever way by having humanity be the actual threat.
The final threat.
So yeah.
And I also just really like soldier scene where you see soldiers. It's intimidating, and I think it's very well done here. I think it's better done here than I've seen in a lot of things.
Oh yeah, it's very spooky, and the music helps with that too.
Yeah,
Shirasagi
Suits.
Suits.
Every track in this movie is so good. I remember all of them. I listened to the OST for EOE probably more than anything, a lot of other things that I listened to.
Dun, 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 dun. It's like stuck in
Dun,
my
dun,
head
dun, dun,
forever.
dun, dun. They love that music cue. They do overuse it a little bit. It's like 10 times in this first act. Every time they end a scene, they're like, "Oh no, the Magi!" Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah.
Oh no, soldiers are coming! Dun, 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 dun. He keeps doing that. It's very rhythmic, though. I like that track. I used it in a university presentation once, actually, when I talked about something intimidating. I played it.
You mentioned the energy of these scenes in general, and I just wanted to highlight that, like, Hideaki Anno, part of his style, I think, as an animation director. I mean, this is true of Kare Kano. It's true of Nadia to a degree as well.
Shin Godzilla even.
His scenes are rapid fire. They're very high energy a lot of the time. I told you this story already, but I was told by a professor to watch some of my favorite movies and have a stopwatch and just count how long the scenes are. And scenes in movies are very fast a lot of the time, and it doesn't really feel that way because it's reusing a lot of the same locations, and so you're kind of just generally in the same spaces. But a movie scene on average is anywhere between like 30 seconds to 1 minute 30 seconds, and it just keeps the pace going pretty high. And in animation, it can get really, really slow at times, where you can like a lot of animated films are very, like, they can sometimes drag things out. Like, we talked about Ghost in the Shell, for example. Like, those scenes are like sometimes 2 to 5 minutes long. So, but there's something much more filmic.
That's a procedural show, though.
Yeah.
To be fair. That's a genre thing.
Yeah, maybe it is. Yeah, in the case of the original Ghost in the Shell. But that sort of snappier, fast-paced type of thing is seen as good form a lot of the time in live action and Western film, and Anno definitely directs his work in that way, where it has that same quality. It's very cinematic. It's very like live action adjacent, which is cool. So,
well, it's also a good way to make the exposition interesting, because you'll have it's like, oh, we have a scene with all the generals in the boardroom. Well, cut that between the fight going on and show that, okay, they're talking about the fight, show the fight at the same time. That's basically what they do. So we'll have scenes with they'll have scenes with the bridge crew. It's the bridge crew I'm talking about. They'll be talking about the action. We'll cut to the action. We'll cut back to the bridge crew, and they'll be explaining what's going on, so you kind of understand the context of things, and you're seeing it happen at the same time. So it is both viscerally interesting, and also you understand it, which is really neat.
Yeah.
There's also like, so the scene of, normally in the show they would just cut to the bridge immediately. It's not a bridge, the command room immediately, and Masato would be standing there, and they'd be like, the men are attacking and this is happening, da 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 da. But because it's a movie, we have this super cinematic scene of her walking down a hallway on a cell phone. She undoes her hair, she whips it in the wind, and she's like, takes an elevator up to the action, and it's like, oh, that's just so much more visually interesting and dynamic than just a steady shot of the display window where they look at everything.
It gives you the same feeling of like a person coming out of retirement to take command or something like that.
A little bit, yeah.
It's that same sort of directing that you'd expect from that, and I really appreciate it. It's not that Misato hasn't been in charge for The Last Angels, but I think it really shows that she is taking a very active role compared to some of the previous episodes, where maybe like Kaji was on her mind a little bit, and she's like kind of so this unfurling of the hair, it's like, I'm ready to play ball with these guys, and I think it's just so cool. Like they direct her really super neat. Cool in this movie in general. She is very cool,
and she's the action hero. Her and Asuka probably are like really the action heroes of the movie, because Shinji doesn't actually have a fight.
Yeah, Shinji is lame. He's a lame-o.
Shinji's lame. He's a lame.
But that's why I like him. But it is funny to me that all the women really have like these. They take a lot of charge. Like even Rei, right? She like totally undermines Gendo and stuff, and there's a strong force of like all the female characters are at their A game here and are ready to do stuff, which is cool. So, and Shinji's not, and
No,
Shinji and Gendo do the equivalent of twiddling their thumbs most of the movie. So
they do.
Yeah.
Then so fight scene, backlight, blah blah blah, action, lots of action, and then I think the next really relevant thing that happens is Masato sees Shinji on the view screen, and oh no, he's depressed.
Oh, he's not doing any. He's gonna die if he.
He's gonna die. They have to, and again, setting up the stakes. The 3 pilots are what they're after. They want to kill the pilots to stop people from using the Evangelions. Masato's like, okay, we better get them to safety. Where's Shinji? And then she has to go rescue Shinji. So it's clearly giving you the crumbs to keep you going through the movie.
I like how
breadcrumbs.
Breadcrumbs. I like how Gendo's like, the JSSDF are here. I'm gonna go get Rei, and then Masato's like, the JSSDF are here. I'm gonna go get Shinji, and then nobody's like, I'm gonna go get Asuka. Just dump her in the bottom of the lake.
Just put her in the bottom of the lake. She'll be safe there. It's fine. She'll be okay. She's in a coma. It's fine.
Yeah.
Half starved, dehydrated, in recovery. We don't know. We couldn't save her.
Stick her in the AV unit and send her to the bottom of the lake. I didn't know that we had
She'll be safer there.
It's like, I didn't know that we had a way to evacuate them to the bottom of the lake, but sure, send them there.
Without anyone noticing either. Like, no one knew it. Oh, no, they did. I guess they did know because they were launching bombs down there. But
I mean, it is plausible that it shows us plenty of times that the Ava units can be, basically, they have plenty of extraction points where there's like, they have ways to get pretty much anywhere in the geo front if they need to. But it is really funny to imagine so just like tubes. Misato shooting Asuka up this elevator shaft, and then she's just dumped at the bottom of the lake. Like fetal position and all.
God. There are I don't think there's really much to say about the scenes of Rei. There's palate cleansers. They break up the action. Just Rei floating in the LCL, and Gendo comes and get her. That's pretty much it. We can talk more about that later. And then there is one thing though. The army is killing unarmed civilians, which I didn't really understand. But then I noticed in the scene with the Prime Minister, which was a little later, he's saying like, "I can't believe Nerve would have the nerve," I didn't mean to do that, to do third impact and destroy humanity. What were they thinking? And then I started to realize, oh, to get the JSSF to do DF to do this, they lied to the Prime Minister and said, Nerve has betrayed us. They're going to start a third impact. You have to intervene now.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's interesting. That's a little bit of political background, which I got. I got it this time.
Yeah, there is almost like a criticism, I guess, of, I mean, like Anno likes this a lot because Shin Godzilla is a huge criticism of the Japanese infrastructure and military or lack thereof in how they handle crises. And in this case, they're very easily manipulated, like the Japanese Prime Minister and the government, which might be some slight shade on them to maybe like it's like maybe you're overreacting a little bit, Japanese government. But it is interesting because they could have said that these soldiers are not the JSSDF, that they belong to Sele, and they're just Sele units or something. But like they chose specifically to make them the Japanese military and have it be like Japan working against its best interests.
For Japanese, something
or
strategic defense force.
Yeah. Because they don't actually have a real military in Japan. Like America came in, we demilitarized them, so they have to have
don't have a military.
Yeah, they have to have some sort of special forces unit that's not military to be the military.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a I guess you could say it's more of like what you'd think of like maybe a Secret Service type of thing, but yeah.
Sort of, yeah. It's like the National Guard.
Yeah, like a National Guard.
It is basically an army, but it's not called an army, so that it doesn't violate a treaty.
Yeah. I want to talk about two things as well, which is one, I really like the fact in this movie that Anno uses, or whoever, maybe it's not Anno. Well, this movie's the first half
Maybe
is directed by
We
Tsurumaki.
didn't say who wrote or directed this, but I mean, it's a lot of Anno.
Yeah, it's a lot of Anno. It's the first half was directed by Kazuya Tsurumaki, who is the creator of Fooly Cooly and the director of that.
He just does whatever Anno says anyway.
Yeah, I mean he's Anno's underling for sure. His very own Ray, his very own personal Ray that hasn't found the way to rebel yet.
Okay.
I'm just joking.
That's a call to show him the way. Anyway,
there's a lot of quiet moments that sort of are interspersed with the fast and loud and bombastic stuff. We mentioned before that there's Ray floating in the tub in the Eva graveyard, for example, and she's just kind of there, and it's just a shot of her chilled, and then I think it's immediately contrasted with this big movement. I think it's the Ava unit being ejected or something like that, like this kind of really loud thing. I could be misremembering. I don't have the movie in front of me right now, but it is contrasted with something. There's
a lot of
really loud
scenes with energy like that.
Yeah. That's how it makes the energy even more powerful, is contrasting quiet scenes with high energy scenes, which is, I think, something that this movie does really well. It has those quieter, soft moments and the really big, loud stuff.
Yeah.
And it's
the Asuka stuff is a good example of that, actually, where she's at the bottom of the let's get into that now, actually, where she's at the bottom of the what is it? Is a pond, a lake, bottom of the lake, going, I don't want to die. I don't want to die. I don't want to die.
Yeah.
I don't want to die. I don't want to die. Over and over again, quietly, calmly, and then and it's not an N2 mine, but a missile drops down and blows up right next to the Ava, and she screams and she's like upset about it because it's stressful, but it's like a good use of different energies to give you different levels. Levels are like the most important thing in visual art, any music, whatever. You want levels. You want to hit different things so that it's more dynamic and interesting. Yeah, so then we have Asuka going, I don't want to die, I don't want to die, I don't want to die. Universal thing, right? Nobody wants to die, really. Monster told me that. No one really wants to die.
I don't know, my instincts told me that.
Yeah, your instincts. Yeah, really, your animal instincts encourage you to not stand in front of a moving train. But we also hear, underneath that, we hear the voice of her mother going, I'll keep you safe, I'll protect you, you're not going to die, I'm here to protect you. Which, so it shows how her mother, who she thought abandoned her and who she thought didn't care about her, really does care about her. She's been here the whole time. And so Asuka's been looking for attention, and the attention of her mother has been within arm's reach. She just couldn't see her.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, is that it's almost framing the previous episodes as she refused to listen or even to find her there, right? Where like Ray lectures her about that. She goes in front of the Ava Unit 2 in episode 22 and tries to talk to it, and then thinks that she's being dumb, that it's not real, it's not living. And it's in this scene of desperation that she's finally able to kind of like hear that voice that's been calling out the whole time, and really kind of connect with her mother, because this is a scene about a mother and a daughter reconnecting for the first time in years, and that's what really it's about. And so it's about family, and that's what makes it so powerful.
It's about family. That's what makes it so powerful.
Yeah.
Legit, actually, but it's actually about family.
It is. And that is what makes it so powerful.
It's about parents and children, really, but yeah.
And part of Asuka's problem in general is not being able to really or her refusal to connect to others because of being so kind of like ego driven and egocentric as a form of defense. And so it's like her connecting to her mother gives her power, and human connection and human bonds are the strength that keeps it's the fuel supply that keeps the fire burning. And in Ava, which I really like, I like that, Shinji's a mama's boy. That's why he gets along best with his Ava.
Yes, so. This is mama's boy. Oh, God.
And
anyway,
yeah,
I was gonna say, I think this is a good point to end our part one. So this is part 1 of 1.
Yes,
this is,
and and actually, this is pretty close to where in Death and Rebirth it ended as well.
Yeah, this is probably about the end of Act 2. of the first part.
Yeah, considering it for each episode, quote unquote, half of EOE is 4 acts. This is like halfway through,
halfway through the first half, so the first quarter.
Yeah. It's the first quarter of the movie, and this is in if we're looking at it like a television episode, the end of the first act is when essentially when Sele decides to say that we're not going to resolve this peacefully, and they send in the military forces, and then there's a shift, which is a opportunity for victory against Sele, which is Asuka, the shining hope that penetrates the darkness. And that's kind of like that at 24 minutes in, Asuka makes that connection. And
so this is this is probably the most powerful moment for her character. Is she's at the bottom of the lake, she's going, I want to die, and then she goes, I don't want to die, and then her mother appears to her, and it's almost a perfect parallel of that moment from 24 where she saw her hanging with the red. It's like a green background, holy light behind her, and her hand is extended out to her and says, I'm here, Asuka. It's really powerful, actually. I'm getting a little choked up.
Yeah, and I also want to say as well is that she's in a forest at this point. And this is something that not a lot of people talk about, but right, like the forest is sort of this Jungian kind of idea of like the dark woods. Like when you're at your lowest point, you'll be in this dark forest, and it's a very Jungian sort of psychological principle, like to use like a dark forest as a metaphor for the entanglement of the mind. And so like her mother is leading her out of this dark forest and into the light, and it's kind of like it's really beautiful, powerful imagery when she reaches out to little Asuka's hand. And I think it's also a metaphor that she grows up in an instant too, like where Asuka's like she transforms from a little girl
people need
to the teenager that she is and stuff.
Exactly. So. It's really powerful. I'm getting a little choked up. And Asuka rises out of the lake, ready to kick some ass. And so will we. It'll be a minute for us, but it'll be probably next week.
Yeah.
You'll see part 2 of part 1.
We're going to make it shorter next week. The waits between.
Yeah. Yes. For these multi-parters, we'll do them week to week anyway.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll see you then.
See you next week.
Bye for now.